Nancy, we want to welcome you to the Penthouse Suite interviews. Normally, we would be doing these interviews live and in person at the Penthouse Suites of the Francis Marriott Hotel, which is the headquarters hotel for the conference. And but given the conference itself was totally online, we're obviously having to do all of these interviews online due to the pandemic that we're all having to live through. So we want to welcome you, and we also want to thank you for being willing to put another Zoom session on your schedule. I think a lot of us are pretty much Zoomed out, so we really appreciate you being willing to do that.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm happy to be here, and yeah, I know we probably are all a little zoomed out, but this is the world that we live in now. So you got to adjust and keep it moving, right?
Exactly. And I think Anne has the first question.
Okay.
I do, and what a difference 2 months makes, huh? Yeah. So Nancy, at our long arm of the law session, instead of discussing recent cases related to copyright and IP law, you put the spotlight square on a recent executive order entitled Combating Race and Sex Stereotyping. Why did you feel librarians and publishers should be aware of this particular executive order?
Yeah, that's a great question, Anne. I chose to focus on this issue and this order because of its timeliness and really in response to the current social climate. While intellectual property law and copyright issues will probably always be challenges to how librarians do their work, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion issues are a challenge to the librarians themselves who are attempting to do the work. And I think, unfortunately, 2020 was a year filled with tragedies that put justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion back in the spotlight. And I really felt like we should take this opportunity to make inroads when people are passionate and willing not only to acknowledge the problems, but also seemingly a little bit more willing to act. So, this order was important to me because of how it affects not just our profession in the micro, but in our society at large in the macro. So, and there was kind of a practical reason too, which was that I thought librarians and publishers, if they were trying to address this work, and any challenges within their organizations, needed to be aware of the order and any potential consequences, because I am a firm believer of that forewarned is forearmed policy, right? So you'd rather know before you went into it, than find out later that you may have done something that was contrary to policy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nancy, I suspect it's almost a certainty that the incoming administration will overturn or replace the executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping. But despite this, do you think that there'll be any lasting damage from when the executive order was actually in effect? And do you think the current class action suits that were filed against the executive order will continue?
This question I thought was really interesting, and my gut response was to go lawyer and pragmatist and say that the question assumes facts, not in evidence, right? So when the Biden campaign was asked about overturning this order, specifically, they declined to say whether he would rescind it. What they said instead was, and I'm going to quote here, Vice President Biden stands firmly against discrimination of all kinds, and his administration will tackle systemic racism and other forms of discrimination across all of our laws, policies, and institutions. I think it would be naive to just assume that things will change because the administration is changing. And you really only have to look at the news cycle for the past 2 weeks to see that change is really hard, even under the best of circumstances. And we're not maybe living under the best of circumstances at the current moment. So to answer, I guess, the second part of your question, I think there probably already has been damage from this order, because any library or organization that was on a path to positive change and then had to stop that work, we don't know if they're going to take that, if they're going to go back to those efforts, right? So, and I don't know how we measure that. So I can't say with certainty that there has been lasting damage, but I would suspect that for some organizations, there has been. And then as for the current class action lawsuit, I don't know. I think if he does rescind the order, then, my initial reaction is that then there's no cause of action, and that's required for a lawsuit to proceed. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking we're just going to have to wait and see and keep our eyes glued on what's going on. Make sure we're cognizant of what's happening.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Yep.
So Nancy, did this executive order have any direct impact that you could see, for example, on your member libraries in Ohio Net? Were folks able to work around those negative effects and continue with the diversity work that they were doing? What was your experience of that?
We did have members who were directly affected by this order and actually had to cancel trainings that they had planned because the consultants or whoever the trainers that they were bringing in would have violated this order. So it thwarted, at least temporarily, their efforts to respond to that need for change. And frankly, I think that was probably, unfortunately, one of the intents of the order in the first place. And at this point, I don't know if they've been able to find alternatives to reschedule those things. So we're still kind of in that holding pattern, waiting to see, how they have responded.
Thank you.
The executive order really aimed to interfere in standing practices of training for equity and diversity and inclusion. You were really helpful at the conference in getting us to think constructively about what to do in the present moment. But we were wondering if you could take a broader view of what you're seeing going on in libraries today. From your perspective, what areas related to equity, diversity, and inclusion are most important for libraries to improve awareness and capacity?
That's a great and deep question, Tom. So I think from my perspective, when we talk about libraries instituting better, or frankly, any practices related to justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, we're talking, to my mind, about two things: the front of the house and the back of the house, right? And so when I say front of house, I mean how we serve our community of users, and by back of house, I mean how we take care of our staff. And I think we need to focus on both if we want to be successful in the front of the house. The back has to be in order. But I think the challenge is that libraries, and not just libraries, but library systems, university systems, communities broadly, have to be much more deliberate about incorporating those principles into their norms and ways of being. So diversity and inclusion shouldn't just be an initiative, it should be the principles or contained within the founding principles of the organizational system. I just had a library colleague say to me recently, if you have to tell me how inclusive your library is it really? Like, shouldn't I be able to see that myself when I look at it? And I think that was a great question that, we as librarians should be asking ourselves. If we have to work to show you or tell you how inclusive our environment is, if an outside viewer can't see that for themselves, then is it really inclusive in the ways that matter? And then this is kind of a harder thing, but until white, able-bodied, cis librarians and administrators are willing to be uncomfortable, potentially for sustained periods of time, I don't think we're really going to make any progress, because disrupting those current systems and creating new ones that are inclusive is going to, unfortunately, but necessarily, be uncomfortable for all of those who, even unwittingly, are benefiting from the status quo. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and Brene Brown is one of the people I like to listen to. And she started talking about this example using pie. And I think she was probably talking about vulnerability, but it really reminded me of these, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion principles because of the way she talked about it. So, equity is not a pie. It's not like once I give you a slice of equity, Tom, and you get a slice of equity, Ann, that we're going to run out. There's no limited supply, right? These are ideals that grow when they're shared. They don't decrease. And I think we have to remind people of that it's not this limited, this thing that is available in limited amounts, but it's something that really grows as it's shared. So creating equitable systems begets more equity. Sharing privilege results in more people with privilege, and implementing those principles can lead to a real sense of inclusion and belonging, which is kind of our end goal. So unfortunately, I don't know that I have, the answer for how you do that, but I feel like there's so much work that's already been done that many of the answers are out there. And because we're information professionals and research is one of the things that we do really well, I think it's incumbent upon us to find some of those answers and then operationalize them.
No, well, I agree with you. And the operationalizing is something, as you were talking, I was thinking this all has to become a standard operating procedure. And from what you were saying, we also need to be having a little bit of a change of a mindset and reorient our perspective and our perceptions.
I think that's exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm going to push those last ideas a little bit further, or make them a little bit more practical. So we talk about diversity training. We put people in rooms for hours on end, and we show them lots of nice PowerPoint slides, and we do nice exercises together. To some people, the idea of doing that, like putting people in a room and talking to them about what we should be doing, is kind of belittling. Is there something we should be doing instead of this? What is it we actually need to do on the ground? Given that we're all information professionals and we're good at research and all of that. But here we are, it's today. What do we do?
Well, I think Tom's response actually is a little bit that it requires a change in mindset, because I think part of that question of the, what else could we be doing or what else could we call it, is really an illustration of the complexity of this problem. We need to find a way to get people out of their feelings about the title of the training or teaching or workshop and into the reality of why the work is so important. I think it's interesting because I come from two different fields, both librarianship and law. I think both are filled with lots of people who want to think that either they personally or our profession is different. We are the exception when it comes to equity and inclusion. We welcome everyone. We are welcoming environments. And I don't think that that's true. I don't think that we're that special. I think that we reflect the world in which we live, and we get some things right and we get some things wrong, but we have a long way to go on that road to inclusion in our field and in our society. So, but I would agree, Anne, I think sitting in rows or in Zoom for hours on end while someone shows you a PowerPoint is maybe not the most compelling learning environment. We really, in addition to kind of doing that research for yourself, I would challenge people to especially be reading the research and the scholarship created by POC colleagues, because I think there's been a lot of work done there that hasn't been as widely read and heralded as it should be. And then I can't really tell you what best practices are because I'm not an expert in this. I can only, for example, share what we're doing at Ohio Net. So, because we are trying to operationalize these principles. So I do the research myself. I read a lot. I follow a diverse group of people on Twitter and on LinkedIn so that I can see ideas that are coming from other areas. I pay attention to what's happening in other industries, for example, because librarians don't have, well, we may know where to find the answers. That doesn't necessarily mean we have all the answers. And in anything that I'm not well versed, and there are many areas where I'm not an expert, I go seek the experts. And then I try to apply what I'm learning to the work that we're doing at Ohio Net. And I would just say that I tend to place special emphasis on by POC experts because I believe that their lived experience in combination with their scholarship and their professional experience is what we need to guide us doing this important work. So the experts are out there, they exist in our field and out of our field. It's our job to find them and ask them to help us do the work and to pay them what they're worth when we ask them to do the work.
Good point. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Nancy, it's obviously it's extremely important to have better practices and know exactly how to do these things. But we also think it's equally important to be able to measure your success in achieving the EDI goals. How can libraries do that?
Yeah, I think I have two thoughts on this. The quick answer is recruitment and retention, right? So is the number of diverse library staff increasing in your library and your campus and your community? And if yes, great, figure out why. And if not, figure out why. And then the bigger question to me is when a library user enters your library, whether you're a public library, K-12, academic, do they see professionals who look like them? And if you can answer that yes, that's at least an easily quantifiable way to say that some of those efforts are being successful. But I think the longer answer is that this is different for every library. It's really hard to measure success unless you first articulated your goal. It's kind of it's that old Stephen Covey adage, right? To begin with the end in mind. So I think libraries that are embarking on this work need to be really intentional about creating their goals and benchmarks before they start, so that they have kind of a roadmap to where they want to go and they can measure success as they've defined it as they work towards those goals. It's almost strategic planning 101. And I think that answer will be different for every library.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Nancy, we remember when you were appointed as executive director and CEO of Ohio Net, and it seems like yesterday, but it's been a couple of years now. So it's, wow. can you give us some kind of temperature or progress report? What kind of key challenges, not necessarily with diversity and inclusion, but in general, what kind of key challenges have there been, and have you been, has anything been a surprise or unexpected? What do you feel best about at this point?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah, you're right. And that 2 years has gone by really, really quickly. It feels like just yesterday that I moved to Ohio. And I would say my first 2 years here have been really good, considering I didn't take the libraries and the time of cholera class in grad school, right? I had no idea that I was going to have to face a pandemic. So on the part of Ohio Net, we've been great. We've been able to grow our team with 3 new people, and that's enabled us to increase our services to our members and provide some new things. I'm really excited that we just completed a rebranding project. So this upcoming year, we're going to also now undergo a website redesign and launch the new brand. And I'm excited to be able to share that with our members. And we're really hopeful that our new website will bring increased opportunities to engage with our members in ways that we haven't. So all of that is super exciting. I think the biggest challenge, probably not a surprise, has been the pandemic and the pivot to remote work, right? So it was really a priority for us to make sure that our entire team had the tools and support they needed to do their work and still be able to support our members. But it was particularly challenging, I think, for the 3 new people, because they started literally months, maybe a few weeks to up to a month before the pandemic started. So kind of building that and maintaining a sense of community among the entire team and connectedness is an ongoing challenge. I think we're doing okay at it, but it certainly is a challenge that's not going to go away anytime soon. I don't know that there have been any particular surprises, or at least not unpleasant surprises. There is something really special in Ohio about the way that the libraries and library organizations really come together that I haven't seen in other states in which I've lived. And it's really cool to see that even the public broadly really supports libraries, even across the political spectrum. So I think that's unique maybe to Ohio, and it's a really Ohio is a great place to be if you're working in libraries. One of the surprises a pleasant surprise has been the size of the BIPOC library community here in Ohio. So I didn't know that before I got here, but I've been able to get really connected with librarians across the state at some of the conferences before the pandemic hit. And even since the pandemic, we've been hosting regular Zoom get-togethers just to kind of, what are you working on? What research are you doing? How are you doing personally? How are you doing being a librarian and now a homeschooling parent potentially? How are you handling all of that? So it's nice to have that group of colleagues who's out there to provide support, certainly. And I think my only disappointment right now is that I can't get out and visit our members. I got here and I've visited a handful of members across the state, but I really would like to be in my car more and out visiting libraries. So when it's safe to do that, I look forward to getting on the road a little bit more and seeing more of Ohio.
Well, Nancy, you mentioned the vibrance of the library community in Ohio, and that kind of leads us to our next question. We suspect that a number of our viewers who are not as familiar with libraries in Ohio may be wondering, what is the difference between Ohio Net and Ohiolink? Can you help us answer that question for them? Also, are there ways that the 2 organizations are collaborating and working together for libraries in Ohio?
Yes, I can tackle both of those. I confess that early in my consortial career, before becoming a Buckeye, I actually confused Ohio Net and Ohiolink as well. So I'm happy to try to clear that up for people. So Ohiolink is a statewide academic library consortium, and they're funded by the Ohio Department of Education, and they serve 88 institutions and the State Library of Ohio. So they're specific to one library type. And what they do, which is fantastic, is they provide a really robust digital research collections. So a lot of e-resources, and they manage collaborative print and digital services for their members. So academic only, 88 institutions across the state, funded by the Ohio Department of Education. Ohio Net, on the other hand, is a 501c3, so we're funded by our members, and we're a statewide multi-type library consortium. So we don't just support academic libraries; we support K-12s, publics, specials. We have some health libraries, law libraries, museums, And we focus on 4 main areas. So we focus on group purchasing power for e-resources and equipment and supplies, which I think a lot of consortium do. We provide training and continuing education opportunities for libraries and library staff. We do, technology solutions for some subsets of our libraries. So there's some public library groups, smaller groups, and academic groups that we provide kind of their tech infrastructure, run their OPAC, that kind of thing. And then we provide a place for strategic connections and partnerships with those organizations. So, but we do a lot together. Ohiolink is a member of Ohio Net, and on the flip side of that, many Ohio Net members are members of Ohiolink. So we certainly share, membership, and we do work together a lot. The latest project that we're doing is the Ohiolink Diversity Initiative. And so we're serving, Ohio Net will be the fiscal agent, but we're also serving, helping out with some of the marketing efforts and just kind of wherever we can help with that particular project. And again, like I said, we're lucky. We really enjoy that strong relationship, not only with Ohiolink, but with the State Library of Ohio and the many other organizations that are serving libraries here. So there's, Ohio Library Council, OPLIN, OELMA, ALAO. So all of those groups that have, the academic libraries, the K-12 libraries, we all work together. And it's really, like I said, it makes Ohio a really great place to be if you're in libraries.
I have to admit, I was a little shaky on the difference between the two. So thank you very much for the clarification. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. We joked, we had an informal meeting probably about a month ago, and we joked, but we really feel like we need to come up with some sort of infographic that demonstrates the difference between Ohio Net and Ohiolink, just so that we have it on hand to share with our members too, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yep, thanks.
Well, Tom, if you thought you were confused, not so long ago, I learned from one of Nancy's staff about another OCLC, and that's the Ohio Central Library Consortium. And that really turned my head inside out, because they're either a partner or a member of Ohio Net in some way.
Their libraries are members of Ohio Net, and we work with them. But yeah, it's another one of those subsets of, they're not a subset of Ohio Net, but they're a smaller group of members that work together to do some things. And yeah, it's confusing to have 2 OCLCs within, 15 minutes of each other.
That's right. Right. Well, it's like you need a scorecard to keep all this straight. It's just remarkable and it also is a reflection of just how vibrant the library world in Ohio is, and is a model for other states, I would argue.
I would agree with that. Thanks. Yeah.
So on maybe a lighter note, in an interview you gave a few years ago to the ACRL Insider, you mentioned that you were looking forward to reading some fiction one of these days or years, including things like Stieg Larsson's Millennium series or The Hunger Games. Did you ever get to read them or anything else in the fiction area?
Oh, I'm impressed with your research.
What's on your wish list?
There's lots. I'm impressed that you dug that up. And so, yeah, I did finish the Hunger Games series. I read that. My daughter was in middle school at the time, so we kind of read it together and then saw all the movies as they came out. I didn't get to the Millennium series, at least not yet. And I confess that right now I'm reading a lot of nonfiction again. So I have 3 books going at once. I tend to read multiple things at a time. So I'm reading Brittany Cooper's Eloquent Rage, which is fantastic. I'm reading Untamed by Glennon Doyle, also really good. Well, all of these are good. I wouldn't keep reading them. And I'm reading Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. So I'm learning a lot about a lot of things. But I have found more time to read fiction since the pandemic started, which has been surprising to me. So I think the book I probably enjoyed the most on the fiction side this last year was The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. And it was this great book about the pack horse librarians in Kentucky. I didn't know what to expect. I read it as part of a book club. It was really good and really interesting. So I certainly recommend that. And then I guess my current wish list, what's next is I need to finish Becoming by Michelle Obama. My son got that for me for Christmas a few years ago, and I need to, get that done. And then I was just given a copy of A Promised Land by Barack Obama. So I have a lot of Obama reading in my house, apparently. And And then I've enjoyed entering the world of podcasts. So I am listening to things in addition to reading more, I'm listening more. So, and I would say my top podcasts right now that I'm enjoying are True Crime Obsessed, which, I don't know what that says about me, but it's a super interesting take on different documentaries and movies about true crime. And then the commentators do, give their commentary, and they're kind of fantastic. There's a great podcast that I found, I think on NPR, called Spectacular Failures, which talks about like corporate level failures and the lessons that were learned. And most of them really shows how they were turned into successes. So in a year when we've had a lot of challenges, it's interesting to listen to how other people have met challenges and kind of overcome them. And then Brene Brown's Unlocking Us is really also a podcast that I'm enjoying. I would recommend for if people are looking for something new to listen to.
Well, I have to say I'm very impressed by your reading list. And I might mention that this interview could very well become part of our podcast. We have a podcast, the Against the Grain podcast, that we have on our website. So be on the lookout for that. You may be featured in one of our, in fact, I suspect you will be featured in one of our podcasts.
Oh, I love that. I will watch out for that. Thank you.
Yeah. Nancy, thank you so much. We really appreciate you enlightening us, really, because that executive order was something that most of us had no awareness of. And I know I really appreciate your willingness to talk to us about it and the explanation that you've given. You've really clarified things. So thank you very much.
You're so welcome, Tom. Again, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm lucky because I am able to combine two sort of disparate fields into something that makes sense. And it's always a pleasure to be able to share the things I learn with others. So It's been a pleasure.
I also want to thank Anne for doing such a great job in putting the Long Arm of the Law series together and inviting great speakers like you to the conference. It's really is a wonderful contribution, and it is deeply appreciated. So thank you, Anne.